revealing the power of authority. Watch this officer in action. Cars moved steadily, horns sounded now and the city felt alive but normal. No one knew that this ordinary day would soon turn into something people would remember for a long time. The police officer woke up early, just as he did every day. His routine never changed much. He believed discipline started with small habits. After getting ready, he put on his uniform carefully, checking every button and every detail. For him, the uniform was not just clothing. It was a symbol of duty and trust. He looked at himself briefly in the mirror, not with pride but with responsibility. He reminded himself that people expected safety and fairness from him. On the way to work, he passed familiar streets. He had been working in this area for years, so he knew its rhythm well. He knew which corners were always crowded, which shopkeepers opened early, and which streets became noisy after sunset. This knowledge helped him do his job better. He believed that understanding people was just as important as following rules. When he arrived at the station, he greeted his colleagues with a calm nod and a short smile. There was no loud talk or joking from him. He preferred to listen more than speak. After checking in, he reviewed the tasks for the day. Nothing seemed unusual. No major alerts, no serious warnings. It looked like it would be another regular shift. As he stepped outside to begin his patrol, the city felt busy but peaceful. He walked slowly, observing everything around him. He watched people crossing the road, street vendors arranging their goods, and buses stopping to pick up passengers. These small details mattered to him. They helped him sense when something felt wrong. While walking, he thought about what authority really meant. Many people believed authority was about power or control, but he did not see it that way. To him, authority meant service. It meant staying calm when others were angry. It meant making fair decisions, even when no one agreed with you. These thoughts had guided him throughout his career. As the morning progressed, the streets became more crowded. Office workers rushed with coffee in hand, students laughed loudly, and delivery trucks blocked narrow roads. The officer adjusted his pace, staying alert. He noticed a small argument between two drivers over parking, but it ended quickly. He made sure things stayed calm and continued on his route. Then his radio crackled softly. At first, it was just background noise, nothing urgent. He listened carefully, as he always did. A few moments later, a clear message came through. There was a report of a disturbance not far from his location. The voice on the radio said the situation was growing and attracting attention. He stopped walking for a moment. His expression changed, but only slightly. He took a deep breath and responded calmly, confirming he was nearby and would check it out. He did not rush in panic. Experience had taught him that calm thinking saved time and prevented mistakes. As he moved toward the reported area, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The sounds of the city shifted. There was more noise ahead, raised voices, sharp words, and movement that felt restless. People nearby slowed down, some curious, others uneasy. A few took out their phones, sensing something unusual was happening. The officer kept his posture straight and his pace steady. He did not want to arrive looking aggressive or careless. He wanted to be seen as present and in control. With every step, he reminded himself that his actions would influence how others reacted. As he got closer, he could see a small crowd forming. People stood in loose circles, talking loudly, pointing, and reacting emotionally. The exact cause of the disturbance was not yet clear, but it was obvious that emotions were high. Situations like this could change quickly if not handled properly. He stopped at a short distance and observed first. This was his habit. He believed in understanding before acting. He watched body language, listened to words being exchanged, and noticed who seemed most upset. This moment of observation helped him plan his next move. Some people in the crowd noticed him and whispered to each other. A few stepped back slightly, while others stared directly at him. The presence of a uniform always changed the mood. Some felt safer, others felt challenged. He knew this well and accepted it as part of his role. The officer stepped forward calmly, making his presence clear without raising his voice. He did not shout or threaten. He simply stood where everyone could see him. His calm energy began to affect the space. A few voices lowered, and some people stopped talking altogether. Before he could speak, his radio buzzed again with more details. The disturbance involved a disagreement that had been going on for some time and was now drawing more attention. The officer acknowledged the updates silently and focused on the people in front of him. He knew this was the kind of moment where authority would be tested. Not through force, but through judgment. The choices he made in the next few minutes could either calm the situation or make it worse. He felt the weight of that responsibility, but he did not let it show. He took another step forward and prepared to address the crowd. His face remained neutral, his voice ready to be firm but respectful. Around him, the city continued moving, unaware that a small but important moment was unfolding right there on the street. This was no longer just a normal day. What started as a routine patrol had turned into a situation that demanded patience, control, and true leadership. The officer was ready to act, not with anger or fear, but with calm authority and purpose. The officer stood quietly for a moment, letting the noise settle around him. People were still talking over each other, voices sharp and restless. Some were clearly angry, others confused, and a few simply curious. He could feel the tension in the air, like a tight string ready to snap. This was the part of the job that required more than rules. It required patience. He raised one hand slightly, not as a command, but as a signal. His voice was calm when he spoke, steady and clear enough to be heard without shouting. He asked everyone to take a step back and give each other space. Some listened right away. Others hesitated, unsure whether to cooperate or continue arguing. One man near the center of the crowd spoke loudly, questioning why the officer was getting involved. His tone was challenging, almost daring. A few people nodded along, feeding off his energy. The officer did not respond immediately. He looked at the man carefully, not with anger, but with focus. He had learned that reacting too fast often made things worse. Instead of answering the challenge directly, the officer repeated his request for space and calm. He explained that his job was to understand what was happening and make sure everyone stayed safe. His words were simple, chosen carefully so no one felt attacked. Still, not everyone was satisfied. The man took a step forward, still speaking loudly. Others around him grew more vocal. The crowd shifted, bodies moving closer together again. The officer felt the pressure rise. He knew this was a critical moment. If he showed frustration, the situation could spin out of control. He adjusted his stance, grounding himself. He reminded himself of his training and his values. Authority, he believed, was not about proving dominance. It was about guiding behavior. He addressed the man directly now, asking him to lower his voice and explain the issue calmly. For a second, it seemed like the man might listen. Then he laughed, shaking his head. Some people in the crowd reacted, a few pulling out their phones. The presence of cameras added another layer of tension. The officer knew every word and movement could be recorded and shared. Despite this, he remained composed. He did not let the cameras change his behavior. He had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. He focused only on the people in front of him and the responsibility he carried. He noticed a woman nearby who looked worried rather than angry. She kept glancing around, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. The officer recognized this as a sign that the situation was affecting more than just those arguing. Innocent people were being pulled into the stress. He spoke again, this time addressing the whole group. He explained that disagreements could be handled without shouting and that everyone would get a chance to speak if they stayed calm. His tone was firm now, still respectful but stronger. Some people began to step back, creating space. The man at the center crossed his arms, still resistant but quieter. The officer took that as progress. Small steps mattered. He asked one simple question about what had started the disagreement. For a moment, no one answered. Then voices began again, overlapping and unclear. The officer raised his hand once more, asking for one person to speak at a time. He pointed gently toward the man who seemed most involved and asked him to explain his side first. This surprised some people. They expected force or orders, not conversation. The man hesitated, then began to speak, still emotional but more controlled. As he talked, the officer listened carefully, nodding slightly to show he was paying attention. This simple act changed the mood. Others saw that the officer was not there to silence anyone but to understand. As the man finished, another person tried to interrupt. The officer stopped him politely and said he would get a turn. This clear structure brought a sense of order. Voices lowered. People waited. Still, tension remained. One wrong word could bring it all back. The officer felt the weight of the moment. He stayed alert, watching hands, faces, and movements. His calm was not weakness, it was discipline. He summarized what he had heard in simple terms, showing that he understood the issue. This made people feel seen. Even those who disagreed could not deny that he was listening. The man at the center looked less defensive now, though frustration still showed on his face. The officer then explained what could and could not be done according to the rules. He did not lecture. He spoke plainly, without complicated language. He made it clear that shouting and crowding were not acceptable, but discussion was. A few people muttered under their breath, but no one raised their voice. The crowd had changed. What began as chaos was slowly becoming conversation. The officer could feel the shift, subtle but real. Suddenly, another voice from the back tried to restart the argument, louder and sharper. The officer turned calmly, meeting the voice with a steady look. He asked the person to step forward and speak respectfully. The firmness in his tone left little room for refusal. The person paused, then chose not to push further. This moment showed the quiet power of authority used correctly. No force was needed. Presence and clarity were enough. The officer knew the situation was not over yet. Emotions were still high, and resolution would take time. But he had passed the most dangerous phase. The moment where things could have exploded had been handled with care. As he stood there, guiding the conversation, the city continued around them. Cars passed, people walked by, and life went on. Yet for those in the crowd, this moment felt important. They were witnessing how calm leadership could change a difficult situation. The officer stayed focused, ready for whatever came next. He knew that true authority was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, patient, and fair. And in this moment of resistance and pressure, that belief was being put to the test. The officer could feel the situation slowly changing, but he did not relax. Experience had taught him that calm moments could still break if handled carelessly. He stayed focused, standing firmly but not aggressively. His eyes moved across the group, reading faces, noticing small movements, and listening to every word being said. The crowd was quieter now. People were no longer shouting, but the tension had not fully disappeared. Some individuals still looked upset, their arms crossed, their faces tight. Others seemed relieved that someone was finally taking control in a calm way. The officer knew that this was the moment where real authority mattered most. He spoke again, his voice steady and clear. He reminded everyone that the street was a shared space and that no one had the right to disturb peace for others. He did not accuse anyone directly. Instead, he spoke about responsibility and respect in general terms. This made people listen without feeling attacked. One young man stepped forward slightly and tried to explain his side again, but his voice began to rise. The officer raised his hand gently and asked him to slow down. He told him that he was being heard, but shouting would not help. The young man paused, took a breath, and continued more calmly. This small moment showed the power of control without force. The officer noticed that others in the crowd were watching closely. They were learning from his behavior, even if they did not realize it. When people saw calm being rewarded with attention, they began to copy it. Voices stayed low. Movements became less sharp. The officer asked clear questions, one at a time. He did not rush. He allowed people to finish speaking before responding. This patience surprised many. Some had expected quick orders or harsh words. Instead, they saw someone who was confident enough to wait. As the discussion continued, the officer carefully corrected misunderstandings. He explained facts simply and clearly. When someone said something incorrect, he did not embarrass them. He calmly explained the correct information. This built trust, even among those who were unhappy. One person tried to test the officer's limits by stepping too close. The officer adjusted his position slightly, keeping a safe distance, and asked the person to step back. His tone was firm now, leaving no confusion. The person hesitated, then obeyed. The message was clear. Calm did not mean weak. The officer's training guided every move. His posture was balanced. His hands were visible and relaxed. His voice stayed even. These details mattered. They showed confidence and control without fear. People sensed this and responded to it. The crowd had grown smaller as some people chose to leave. Those who stayed were calmer, more willing to talk. The officer saw this as progress. A situation that could have grown larger was now slowly shrinking. He summarized the discussion again, showing that he had listened to everyone. This made people feel respected, even if they did not get everything they wanted. Respect often mattered more than winning an argument. Then the officer explained what would happen next. He clearly stated the steps that would be taken to resolve the issue. There was no confusion in his words. He made sure everyone understood. Clear communication reduced anxiety and prevented new arguments. A few people nodded in agreement. Others looked disappointed but accepted the outcome. No one shouted. No one tried to restart the conflict. This was a sign that the officer's approach was working. One bystander quietly said that the situation could have gone much worse. The officer heard this but did not react. Praise was not his goal. Peace was. He remained present, not turning his back too quickly. He knew that ending a situation too fast could cause it to rise again. He stayed until he was sure emotions had settled. As minutes passed, the street returned closer to normal. Traffic noise became louder than voices. People resumed walking. Shops reopened their doors fully. Life slowly moved on. The officer felt the weight lift slightly, but he stayed alert. He knew that authority required constant awareness. It was not something you used once and forgot. It had to be maintained through consistent behavior. He looked around one last time, making eye contact with a few people, not in a threatening way, but in a reassuring one. Some nodded back. Others simply looked away and continued their day. In that moment, the officer showed the true strength of authority. Not through control, but through calm leadership. Not through force, but through understanding and firmness. As he stepped back onto his patrol route, he knew the situation was not just resolved, it was transformed. What began as tension had become a lesson in how calm action could change behavior. The officer continued walking, his pace steady. The city felt different now, quieter somehow. He knew another challenge could come at any moment, but he also knew he was ready. True authority, he believed, was not something you demanded. It was something you demonstrated. And today, in the middle of pressure and resistance, he had done just that. The street looked calmer now, but the officer knew the situation was not fully finished. Experience had taught him that the most important moments often came after things seemed under control. People were quieter, yet emotions were still present under the surface. This was the point where one wrong move could undo everything. He stayed where he was, not rushing to leave. His calm presence continued to hold the space together. Some people were still standing nearby, watching him closely. Others whispered among themselves. The officer understood that many of them were trying to decide whether this moment would end peacefully or turn into something else. One man, who had been quiet for most of the time, stepped forward slowly. He looked unsure, like he had something to say but did not know if he should. The officer noticed him right away. Instead of ignoring him, the officer nodded gently, giving him permission to speak. The man cleared his throat and began explaining his concern. His voice was not loud, but it carried emotion. He spoke about feeling unheard earlier and how the argument had grown from a small misunderstanding. As he talked, others listened. Some looked surprised, as if they were hearing this side for the first time. The officer did not interrupt. He listened fully, even when the man paused or searched for words. This patience changed the energy again. People could see that the officer was not just managing the crowd, but truly listening. When the man finished, the officer thanked him for speaking calmly. That simple acknowledgement meant a lot. It showed that respectful behavior was valued. Others in the group seemed more willing to cooperate now. The officer then asked if anyone else wanted to speak, reminding them to do so calmly and briefly. A woman raised her hand slightly and shared her perspective. Her tone was steady, and she focused on explaining rather than blaming. This was a turning point. The crowd was no longer arguing, they were communicating. The officer carefully connected the points being shared. He spoke about how misunderstandings could grow when emotions took over. He reminded everyone that reacting without listening often made small issues feel bigger than they really were. His words were simple, but they carried weight. At one moment, a man in the back made a negative comment under his breath. Earlier, this might have sparked another argument. This time, it didn't. The officer calmly looked toward him and asked if he wanted to share something directly. The man hesitated, then shook his head and stayed quiet. The moment passed without tension. This showed the power of the officer's approach. By inviting conversation instead of forcing silence, he removed the need for resistance. People felt included, not controlled. The officer then explained the next steps clearly. He spoke about what could be done immediately and what could not. He did not make promises he couldn't keep. Honesty was important to him. Even if people didn't like the answer, they deserved the truth. Some people looked disappointed, but they accepted it. They could see that the officer was being fair, not choosing sides. Fairness created trust, and trust created calm. The crowd continued to shrink as people felt there was nothing more to argue about. Those who stayed were relaxed now, some even chatting quietly among themselves. The street felt lighter, like a heavy cloud had slowly lifted. The officer remained alert, watching for any sudden change. He knew calm could be fragile, but minute by minute the peace held strong. A few bystanders who had been recording earlier lowered their phones. The moment was no longer dramatic. It was human and ordinary again. That was a good sign. One person thanked the officer quietly before walking away. The officer nodded but said nothing. He didn't need recognition. Knowing the situation ended safely was enough. As time passed, the officer took a small step back, testing the stability of the situation. Nothing changed. No voices rose. No one stepped forward angrily. The crowd had accepted the outcome. The officer then made a final announcement, reminding everyone to move along and continue their day. His voice was calm but clear. People listened and followed his direction without complaint. Shops returned to normal activity. Traffic flowed smoothly again. The street no longer felt like a problem area. It was just another part of the city once more. The officer stood still for a moment, taking everything in. He reflected quietly on what had just happened. The turning point was not force or command. It was listening. That choice had changed everything. He knew that many people believed authority was about control, but moments like this proved otherwise. Real authority came from understanding when to speak and when to listen. As he prepared to leave, he checked his surroundings one last time. Everything was stable. He adjusted his uniform slightly and took a slow breath. Walking away, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. He knew the situation would soon be forgotten by most, but the impact remained. People had seen a different kind of leadership today. The officer returned to his patrol, blending back into the rhythm of the city. Another challenge could come at any time, but he was ready. This moment had shown that true power did not come from loud voices or harsh actions. It came from calm judgment, patience, and the courage to listen when others expected force. The turning point had passed, and peace had followed. The officer continued walking down the street, his steps steady and unhurried. The noise of the earlier crowd had faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of the city. Cars moved along the road, shop doors opened and closed, and people returned to their routines. To most, it was just another day, but for the officer, it was a moment to reflect. He replayed the situation quietly in his mind, not with pride, but with care. He thought about the choices he had made, the words he had used, and the moments where he had decided to listen instead of react. These reflections were part of his routine. He believed that learning never stopped, especially in a job where every decision mattered. As he walked, a few people passed him and nodded politely. Some recognized him from the earlier moment. Their expressions were calm, even respectful. He did not seek their attention, but he noticed the change. Fear was not present, neither was anger. That meant something had gone right. The officer reached a quieter area and paused briefly near a corner. He adjusted his radio and checked his surroundings. Everything was normal. No urgent calls, no signs of trouble. Still, he stayed alert. Authority was not something you turned on and off. It was a constant state of awareness. He thought about how easily the situation could have gone another way. A raised voice, a rushed decision, or a lack of patience could have changed the outcome completely. That understanding kept him humble. It reminded him that control was fragile and peace had to be protected carefully. As time passed, he continued his patrol. The sun had moved higher in the sky and the city felt warmer. People seemed lighter, less rushed. The earlier tension was gone, leaving behind only memory. Elsewhere, the moment began to spread quietly. People talked about what they had seen. Some shared stories with friends, describing how the officer had handled the situation calmly. There was no excitement in their voices, only respect. That kind of reaction mattered more than loud praise. Later, at the station, the officer checked in briefly. He did not mention the incident unless asked. For him, it was simply part of the job. Still, one colleague noticed his calm demeanor and asked if everything was okay. The officer nodded and said it was a normal day, but it was not just a normal day. It was a reminder of why he had chosen this path. He believed that authority carried responsibility, not privilege. It meant protecting peace, even when it was difficult. As the shift continued, the officer responded to smaller tasks. Giving directions, checking on neighborhoods, helping someone with a minor concern. Each action, though simple, carried the same values he had shown earlier: respect, patience, and clarity. Toward the end of his shift, he returned to the station. The day was slowing down, and the city prepared for evening. He removed his uniform carefully, folding it neatly. He treated it with care because it represented trust placed in him by others. Before leaving, he sat quietly for a moment. He looked around the station, listening to the soft sounds of movement and conversation. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something meaningful. On his way home, he walked through familiar streets again. The same places where the day had begun. Everything looked normal. People laughed, talked, and lived their lives. No signs of conflict remained. That was the goal all along. As he reached his home, he felt a sense of calm. He did not think of himself as a hero. He thought of himself as a guardian of balance, someone who stepped in when things felt uncertain and helped guide them back to calm. That night, as the city lights came on, the officer rested. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new situations, new choices. But the lesson of the day would stay with him. Authority, he knew, was not about being above others. It was about standing with them when things became difficult. It was about staying calm when emotions ran high. It was about listening when silence could have been easier. Somewhere in the city, people would remember what they had seen. Maybe it would change how they reacted next time. Maybe it would remind them that calm could solve what anger could not. The officer did not need to know the full impact of his actions. He trusted that doing the right thing, quietly and consistently, was enough. As the night settled in, the city continued breathing, moving, living. And within it, the example of calm authority remained, not loud or demanding, but steady and real. This was the true power of authority. Not control through fear, but guidance through calm action. Not force, but fairness. Not noise, but presence. And tomorrow, the officer would return, ready to serve again.